Welcome, dear friends, to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient worlds come alive in the gentle embrace of twilight. I'm your narrator, and tonight we journey together across centuries and continents to a place where gods walked among mortals, where floating cities rose from emerald lakes, and where the very stones themselves seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of empire. As you settle into your favorite resting place, allow your breathing to slow and deepen. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders like morning mist rising from still waters. Tonight, we travel not through the hurried pace of modern life, but through the measured rhythms of legend and memory, where every word carries the weight of ages. Our story begins in the high valleys of central Mexico, where the morning sun paints the peaks in shades of gold and amber. Here, in this land of eternal spring, where the air is thin and pure, and where the boundary between earth and sky seems gossamer thin, we discover one of humanity's most remarkable civilizations. Close your eyes and imagine, if you will, a vast lake stretching to the horizon, its surface mirror smooth in the pre-dawn stillness. The water reflects not just the sky, but something more mysterious, more profound. For this is Lake Texcoco, and rising from its depths like a dream made manifest, stands the greatest city of the New World, Tenochtitlán, the Venice of the Americas, where stone causeways stretch like fingers across the water, where pyramids pierce the clouds, and where the very air seems to shimmer with the presence of the divine. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, as stories sometimes do when they are eager to be told. For this tale begins not with a city, but with a people, not with an empire, but with a promise whispered by gods in the language of wind and water, spoken in the flight of eagles, and the blooming of impossible flowers on barren stone. The Aztecs, who called themselves the Mexica, were not always the masters of this floating paradise. They were once wanderers, nomads following a divine vision across the harsh landscapes of the north. They carried with them no great wealth, no mighty armies, only faith and the unshakable belief that their god Huitzilopochtli would lead them to their destined home. Picture them, these ancient pilgrims, walking through landscapes where the desert meets the mountain, where the earth cracks under the relentless sun by day and the stars burn cold and distant by night. They were guided by prophecy, by the promise that when they saw an eagle perched upon a cactus devouring a serpent, they would know they had found their promised land. And so they walked, generation after generation, their feet wearing paths through stone and sand, their eyes always searching the horizon for the sign that would end their wandering. They were a people shaped by movement, by the constant rhythm of departure and arrival, by the understanding that home was not a place, but a destiny waiting to unfold. As you listen to their story tonight, let yourself be carried by the same patient rhythm that carried them across the centuries. Let the gentle cadence of their journey lull you into that peaceful state between waking and sleeping, where the boundaries between past and present dissolve like sugar in water, and where the voices of the ancient world can speak directly to your dreaming mind. Tonight, we will follow their footsteps from the harsh northern deserts to the fertile valleys of the south. We will witness the birth of an empire that would span continents, see the rise of cities that would rival Rome in their grandeur, and learn the stories of gods and mortals whose names still echo in the winds that blow across the Mexican highlands. This is not merely a tale of conquest and empire, though those elements are woven throughout like golden threads in a tapestry. This is a story of human aspiration, of the eternal desire to build something lasting and beautiful, to reach toward the divine and to leave a mark upon the world that will endure long after the builders themselves have returned to dust. So settle deeper into comfort, dear listener. Let the soft rhythm of this ancient story wash over you like warm rain on summer stones. Tonight, we walk with the Mexica on their great journey, and perhaps in the spaces between words, in the pauses, between breaths, we will glimpse something of the divine vision that drove them ever onward toward their magnificent destiny. The story of the Aztecs is about to begin, and like all the best stories, it starts with the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, of believing in something greater than ourselves, and of never, ever giving up on the dream of finding home. In the beginning, it was only the voice of the god speaking across the vast emptiness of the northern wastes. His name was Huitzilopochtli, and he was both terrible and beautiful, a deity of war and the sun, of blood and light, of endings and beginnings. To his chosen people, the Mexica, he was not just a god, but a companion on the longest journey any people had ever undertaken. Listen now to the sound of footsteps on ancient stone, the whisper of leather sandals against packed earth, the soft rhythm of a people in motion. For centuries, they had wandered the harsh landscapes of what we now call northern Mexico, following the voice of their god like sailors following a star. They were not yet the mighty Aztecs of legend. They were simply the Mexica, one tribe among many in the great migrations that swept across the continent like slow tides of humanity. Picture them in the early morning light, as the sun rises over a landscape that seems to stretch beyond the edges of the world. The women carry their children, and precious bundles of seeds, the memory of fertile lands encoded in kernels of corn and beans. The men walk with weapons ready, for the path of the wanderer is never safe, and the northern territories are home to fierce tribes who guard their water sources and hunting grounds with deadly determination. But the Mexica carry something more valuable than weapons or seeds. They carry faith. In their most sacred bundles, wrapped in precious cloth and tended by their priests, they carry the physical presence of their god. Huitzilopochtli travels with them, not as a distant deity dwelling in temples, but as a living force that guides their steps and shapes their destiny. The god speaks to them through dreams and visions, through the flight of birds and the patterns of clouds across the endless sky. He tells them of a homeland waiting somewhere to the south, a place where the earth is rich and the waters run clear, where they will no longer be wanderers but builders, no longer nomads but the masters of a great empire. But first, they must earn this promised land through suffering and perseverance. The journey is long by design, for it is not just a physical passage through space, but a spiritual transformation. With each step, with each generation born on the road, the Mexica become more than they were. They become worthy of the destiny that awaits them. Imagine the children born during these wandering years, children who know no home but the rhythm of the march, no roof but the star-scattered sky. They learn to read the landscape like a book, to find water in the desert, to survive on whatever the harsh land provides. They grow strong and resourceful, shaped by hardship into the kind of people who can build cities from nothing, who can turn swampland into paradise. The old stories tell us that they wandered for over 2 centuries, though time moved differently in those days, measured not in years but in generations, in the lives of grandparents who died without seeing the promised land, and children who were born believing it was just beyond the next mountain, just across the next river. They faced enemies who tried to drive them back into the desert. They endured droughts that lasted for seasons, winters that froze the marrow in their bones. They survived betrayals from allies who grew tired of their endless journey and wanted to settle in places that were good enough, but not the place their God had promised. And through it all, Huitzilopochtli sustained them with visions of what was to come. He showed them glimpses of their future glory, cities rising from water, temples that would touch the sky, warriors whose very names would be spoken with reverence across the world. He gave them the strength to continue when continuing seemed impossible, to believe when belief required more courage than any human heart should have to bear. The God told them to look for a sign, a very specific sign that would mark the end of their wandering. They must find an eagle, the king of birds, perched upon a cactus, devouring a serpent. This was the symbol that would mark their destined homeland, the place where they would finally lay down their walking sticks and take up the tools of builders. As the years passed, the Mexica developed into something unique among the peoples of the Americas. They were not just another tribe, but a nation in motion, a civilization that carried its entire culture in bundles on their backs. They had laws and customs, stories and songs, craft knowledge and spiritual practices that they preserved even as they moved from place to place, generation after generation. They learned to adapt to any environment, to take what they needed from the land without staying long enough to exhaust it. They became masters of temporary settlement, able to build shelters that could be dismantled in hours, to create ceremonial spaces that could be sanctified and then abandoned without losing their sacred power. And slowly, so slowly that no single generation could perceive it, they were moving toward their destiny. The landscape began to change as they traveled south. The harsh deserts gave way to grasslands, the grasslands to forests, the forests to the high valleys where the air was thin and pure, and the mountains wore caps of snow even in summer. They began to encounter other peoples who had already settled in these fertile lands, peoples who had built permanent cities and established trade networks that stretched across the continent. Some welcomed the Mexica as useful allies, fierce warriors who could be hired to fight their enemies. Others saw them as a threat, another group of hungry nomads who would consume resources and then move on, leaving nothing but empty larders behind. But the Mexica were changing too. The long journey had refined them, transformed them from simple nomads into something more complex and sophisticated. They had learned statecraft from the tribes they encountered, architecture from the cities they visited, agriculture from the peoples who had mastered the art of making the earth yield its bounty. They were becoming worthy of the great destiny that awaited them, developing the skills and knowledge they would need to build the most magnificent city the Americas had ever seen. And still, they walked on, following the voice of their God, waiting for the sign that would tell them their wandering was finally over. The eagle had not yet appeared. The cactus and the serpent remained images in prophetic dreams. But with each step south, with each new dawn breaking over the peaks of the central highlands, the Mexica drew closer to the moment when vision would become reality, when the voice of their God would finally tell them to stop walking and begin building. Their feet were weary, but their hearts were strong. Their bodies were tired, but their spirits soared like the eagles they sought. For they knew, with the certainty that comes only from absolute faith, that their God would not abandon them, that their journey would not be in vain, that somewhere ahead lay the promised land where they would finally be home. And then, on a morning when the mist hung low over the waters of Lake Texcoco, it happened. The sign they had waited for, through generations of wandering, finally appeared before their wondering eyes. There, on a small island in the vast lake, stood a magnificent eagle, its wings spread wide to catch the first rays of the sun, perched upon a prickly pear cactus, holding in its powerful talons a serpent that writhed and gleamed like liquid silver dot the silence that fell over the Mexica. Pilgrims was profound, deeper than the quiet of the deepest night. For in that moment they knew their journey had ended and their destiny was about to begin. The voice of Huitzilopochtli whispered in their hearts, confirming what their eyes had already told them. This was the place. This small marshy island, in the middle of a lake, would become the foundation of the greatest city the Americas had ever known. But what they saw in that moment was not yet the gleaming metropolis of legend. It was simply a swampy island, surrounded by the dark waters of the lake, with reeds growing thick along its shores and waterfowl calling from the shallows. To most eyes, it would have seemed an unpromising place to build a city. But the Mexica had learned to see with the eyes of faith, and where others might see only marsh and water, they saw possibility. The lake stretched before them like an inland sea, its waters reflecting the snow-capped peaks of the surrounding mountains. Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl stood sentinel in the distance, their volcanic forms wreathed in clouds that seemed to touch the very heavens. The air was thin and clean at this altitude, carrying the scent of pine from the mountain forests and the earthy richness of the lakeshore. Within days of receiving the divine sign, the Mexica began the incredible work of transforming this watery wilderness into a city. They were not the first people to live on the lake, but they would be the ones to master it completely, to turn its challenges into advantages, its apparent limitations into the very source of their power. They began with the island itself, enlarging it stone by stone, reed bundle by reed bundle. Using techniques learned during their long wandering, they created artificial islands called chinampas, floating gardens that would become the agricultural miracle of the ancient world. These were not simple platforms, but sophisticated ecosystems, carefully constructed layers of mud, vegetation, and stone that created incredibly fertile growing spaces on the water itself. Picture the early builders working in the cool morning. Hours their canoes moving silently through the lake channels as they gathered the materials for their floating city. They cut reeds from the shallows, harvested mud from the lake bottom, and quarried stone from the surrounding hills. Every element was chosen with care, every technique refined through generations of nomadic wisdom. The chinampas were marvels of engineering that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. They were built by first creating a framework of stakes and branches, then filling this framework with layers of lake mud, decomposed vegetation, and fertile soil. The roots of the planted crops would eventually knit these materials together, creating solid growing surfaces that floated on the water like living rafts. But these floating gardens were more than just agricultural tools. They were the building blocks of the city itself, the foundation upon which Tenochtitlán would rise. As the Mexica became more skilled in their construction, they began to build larger and more permanent platforms, connecting them with causeways and bridges until the entire lake began to bloom with human habitation. The city grew organically, like a vast water lily opening its petals to the sun. Streets were canals, and canals were streets. Citizens moved through their city by canoe as easily as by foot, their daily lives intimately connected to the rhythms of the lake. The sound of paddles cutting through water became as common as the sound of footsteps on stone at the heart of the growing city. The Mexica built their most sacred spaces. The Templo Mayor, the great temple that would become the spiritual center of their empire, began as a simple platform of stone and earth. But with each passing year, each new generation of builders, it grew taller and more magnificent, its twin. Pyramids reaching toward the sky, like the prayers of the faithful, made manifest in stone. The temple was dedicated to two gods, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun who had guided them to this place, and Tlaloc, the ancient rain god who ruled over the waters that surrounded them. This pairing was not accidental. It represented the marriage of their nomadic heritage with their new life as masters of the lake, the union of the warrior spirit that had sustained them through the long wandering with the agricultural wisdom they needed to thrive in their new home. As the city grew, so did its population. The Mexica were joined by other peoples who were drawn to this remarkable place rising from the waters. Traders came from across Mesoamerica, bringing goods and ideas that enriched the growing metropolis. Craftsmen arrived to work the stone and obsidian, to weave the brilliant textiles that would become the hallmark of Aztec artistry. Scholars and priests came to study in the temple schools, to add their knowledge to the growing wisdom of the city. But it was the ordinary citizens who truly made Tenochtitlan extraordinary. The farmers who tended the chinampas with loving care, coaxing incredible yields from their floating gardens. The fishermen who knew every channel of the lake, every seasonal migration of the waterfowl. The builders who understood how to work with water instead of against it, Who could construct the magnificent palaces and temples on foundations that flexed and moved with the rhythms of the lake? The city became a marvel of urban planning. With broad causeways connecting the island to the mainland, elaborate systems of canals for transportation, and sophisticated infrastructure for bringing fresh water from the mountains and removing waste from the populated areas. The Mexica had learned to think like the lake itself, to flow around obstacles instead of trying to force their way through them. By the time Tenochtitlan reached its full glory, it housed more than 200,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time. It was larger than Paris, more sophisticated than London, more beautiful than any European capital. Visitors from across the Americas came to marvel at its floating gardens, its towering pyramids, its palaces that seemed to rise directly from the water like something from a dream. The city was divided into districts, each with its own character and specialties. There were neighborhoods of artisans where the sound of chisels on stone and the whisper of looms filled the air. There were districts of merchants where goods from every corner of the known world changed hands. There were sacred precincts where only priests could walk, and royal quarters where the emperor held court in halls that glittered with jade and gold. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Tenochtitlan was how completely it harmonized with its environment. This was not a city imposed upon the landscape, but one that grew from it, that worked with the natural systems of the lake rather than against them. The Mexica had learned to read the moods of the water, to predict the seasonal floods, to channel the life-giving properties of the lake into every aspect of their urban design. At night, when the last light of day faded from the mountain peaks and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the city would glow with the light of countless fires. The reflections of these flames would dance on the dark water, creating the illusion that the city existed in two worlds simultaneously, the world of earth and stone above, and a mirror world of light and shadow below. This was Tenochtitlan, the city of dreams made real, the place where the vision of wandering nomads had been transformed into the most magnificent urban center the Americas had ever known. It was a testament to the power of faith, the rewards of perseverance, and the incredible things that human beings can accomplish when they learn to work in harmony with the world around them. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, where the morning mist rose from the sacred lake and the great pyramid cast its shadow across the plaza, there lived a man who was more than a man. He was called the Tlatoani, a great speaker, and in his person the divine and mortal worlds touched like two hands pressed together in prayer. To understand the Aztec Empire, you must first understand this. Their emperor was not merely a ruler, but a bridge between earth and heaven, a living conduit through which the gods spoke to their people. Picture him in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city still slumbers and the lake lies mirror-still beneath the stars. He stands alone in his private chambers, high in the palace that seems to float above the water like a vision of celestial architecture. His rooms are simple despite their grandeur, for a god-king needs no earthly luxuries to affirm his power. The walls are hung with precious feathers that catch the first light of day, and the floors are covered with mats woven from the finest reeds, soft as silk beneath his feet. But it is not the material splendor that makes this figure so compelling. It is the weight of responsibility he carries, the burden of being the voice through which Huitzilopochtli speaks to his chosen people. Every decision he makes, every word he utters, every gesture he performs carries the authority of the divine. He is the axis around which the entire empire turns, the still point at the center of a world in constant motion. The Tlatoani is chosen not by birthright alone, though noble blood flows in his veins, but by the gods themselves, speaking through the council of nobles who can read the signs of divine favor. He must be a warrior proven in battle, a priest skilled in the sacred mysteries, a diplomat capable of managing the complex relationships between the many peoples who make up the empire. He must be, in short, the perfect synthesis of all the qualities the Mexica hold most dear. From the moment of his selection, his life becomes a ritual, a continuous ceremony of connection between the mortal and divine realms. He rises before dawn to offer prayers to the gods, his voice joining the chorus of temple priests whose chants echo across the water. He performs the sacred dances that maintain the cosmic order, his movements precise and meaningful, each gesture a word in the language that mortals use to speak with gods. But the emperor does not rule alone. Around him moves a complex hierarchy of nobles, priests, and administrators, each with their own role in the intricate dance of governance. The society of the Aztecs is like a great pyramid itself, with the Huitatoani at its apex and the common people forming its broad base, each level supporting and supported by the others in a system that has evolved over centuries to channel the will of the gods into the daily life of the empire. Just below the emperor are the nobles, the Pili, who trace their lineage back to the original followers of Huitzilopochtli. These are the men and women who serve as governors of distant provinces, as judges in the great courts, as generals leading armies across the empire's vast frontiers. They are born to privilege, but that privilege comes with obligations. They must prove themselves worthy of their noble blood through service to the empire and devotion to the gods. The nobles live in palaces that rival the emperor's own, their homes filled with the finest products of the empire's craftsmen. Their gardens bloom with flowers brought from every corner of the known world. Their walls display the works of artists whose names are spoken with reverence in the markets and temples. But luxury is not mere indulgence for the Aztec nobility. It is a form of worship, a way of honoring the gods by creating beauty worthy of their divine appreciation. Below the nobles are the Mexican, the common people who form the backbone of Aztec society. These are the farmers who tend the chinampas, the craftsmen who shape obsidian and jade, the merchants who travel the trade routes that connect the empire to the wider world. They are not nobles, but they are not slaves either. They are free citizens of the empire, with rights and responsibilities that are clearly defined by law and custom. The common people live in simpler homes, but these too are built with care and attention to beauty. Even the humblest dwelling in Tenochtitlán is swept clean each morning, its walls decorated with simple but elegant designs, its small garden tended with the same devotion that the nobles lavish on their grand estates. For the Aztecs understand that beauty is not the privilege of the wealthy, but the birthright of all people, a reflection of the divine order that governs the universe. The craftsmen among the common people are particularly honored, for they are the ones who transform the raw materials of the earth into objects of beauty and utility. The featherworkers create garments and ceremonial objects that seem to capture the very essence of flight. The goldsmiths work the precious metal with such skill that their creations seem to glow with inner light. The stone carvers shape the volcanic rock into sculptures that will endure for centuries, their work a form of prayer made manifest in stone. The merchants, the Pachteca, occupy a special place in this hierarchy. They are commoners by birth, but their travels to distant lands, their knowledge of foreign peoples and customs, their ability to navigate the complex networks of trade that bind the empire together, make them valuable beyond their station. They serve not just as traders, but as spies and diplomats, their caravans carrying not just goods, but information that helps the emperor understand the wider world. At the bottom of the social pyramid are the slaves, the Tlaquetan, but even slavery. In the Aztec world is more complex than it might appear. These are not people condemned to lifelong bondage, but individuals who have fallen into slavery through debt, crime, or capture in war. They retain certain rights, their children are born free, and they can earn or purchase their freedom. Some slaves, particularly those with special skills or knowledge, live better than many free commoners. The entire system is bound together. By law, but law that is understood to flow from divine will rather than human invention. The emperor's court includes judges who are trained in the complex legal traditions of the empire, men who can recite from memory the precedents and principles that govern everything from property disputes to questions of religious orthodoxy. Justice is not seen as a human institution, but as a reflection of cosmic order, a way of ensuring that earthly society mirrors the perfect harmony of the heavens. This hierarchy is not rigid or oppressive, but organic and dynamic. A commoner who shows exceptional skill as a warrior can rise to become a noble. A merchant who serves the empire with distinction can be granted lands and titles. A craftsman whose work particularly pleases the gods can find himself elevated to positions of great honor and responsibility. Merit and divine favor can overcome the circumstances of birth, for the gods are always watching, always ready to reward those who serve them with excellence. The entire system revolves around the concept of service, not just to the empire, but to the cosmic order itself. The emperor serves by channeling the will of the gods. The nobles serve by managing the empire's affairs. The common people serve by producing the goods and services that keep the empire functioning. And even the slaves serve by accepting their fate with dignity and working toward their eventual freedom. It is a society that would seem strange to modern eyes, but it worked with remarkable efficiency for centuries. It created stability in a world of constant change, beauty in a landscape of often harsh realities, and prosperity in a region that had known only subsistence before the Mexica arrived. And at its heart was always the figure of the Tlatoani, the god-king who stood between heaven and earth, ensuring that the voice of the divine continued to guide his people toward their ever greater destiny. In the pre-dawn darkness, when the lake lies silent and the great city sleeps, the sound of drums begins to echo across the water. Not the ceremonial drums of the temple, but the deeper, more urgent rhythms of war. The Aztec Empire was not built on peaceful trade alone, though trade was its lifeblood. It was forged in the crucible of conflict, expanded through the careful application of force, and maintained by the ever-present threat of military might. But to understand Aztec warfare, you must first understand that for the Mexica, war was not merely a political tool, but a sacred duty. Their god Huitzilopochtli was a deity of war as much as he was a god of the sun, and in the Aztec worldview, these two aspects were inseparable. The sun needed strength to rise each morning, to fight its way across the sky against the forces of darkness. And that strength came from the blood of warriors, from the courage of those who were willing to die in battle so that life itself could continue. Picture the young men of Tenochtitlan in the cool morning hours, training in the courtyards of the military schools. They are not yet warriors, but are learning to become something more than human, something worthy of serving the gods in battle. Their bodies are painted with the sacred colors of war, their hair bound with the feathers of eagles and jaguars, the two great military orders that represent the pinnacle of Aztec martial achievement. The eagle warriors, the Cutli, are the masters of the sky, fighters who have learned to see the battlefield from above, to strike with the speed and precision of the hunting birds whose name they bear. They wear elaborate costumes that transform them into living representations of their totemic animal, their helmets carved to resemble eagle heads, their armor decorated with feathers that catch the light like fragments of the sun itself. Jaguar warriors, the ocelotl, are the masters of stealth and strength, fighters who can move through the forest like shadows, who can strike from ambush with the lethal grace of the great cats of the tropical lowlands. Their costumes are spotted like jaguar pelts, their weapons edged with obsidian blades sharp enough to cut through Spanish steel, their hearts filled with the fierce pride of the jungle's apex predator. But the purpose of Aztec warfare was not simply conquest in the European sense. The Mexica sought not to destroy their enemies, but to incorporate them, to make them part of the ever-expanding web of relationships that bound the empire together. They fought not to eliminate other peoples, but to demonstrate the superiority of their gods, the effectiveness of their military system, the benefits of joining the Aztec sphere of influence. When an Aztec army marched to war, it was a sight that would have taken your breath away. The warriors moved in perfect formation, their obsidian-edged weapons glinting in the sunlight, their colorful banners streaming in the wind like prayers made visible. The sound of their approach would reach enemy cities long before the army itself appeared, the rhythmic beat of their drums echoing off the mountains, the war cries of thousands of voices rising to the sky like the calls of hunting birds. But before the first weapon was raised, before the first battle cry was uttered, the Aztec commanders would always attempt negotiation. They would send ambassadors to the enemy city, offering terms that were often generous by the standards of the time. Join the empire willingly, they would say, and you will keep your lands, your customs, your local rulers. Pay tribute to the emperor, acknowledge the supremacy of the Aztec gods, and you will have the protection of the mightiest military force in Mesoamerica. Many cities accepted these terms, recognizing that resistance would bring only destruction, while submission would bring prosperity. The Aztec Empire grew as much through diplomacy as through warfare, as much through the carrot as through the stick. But for those who refused the generous terms, who chose to fight rather than submit, the consequences were swift and terrible. Aztec warfare was a carefully choreographed dance of violence, governed by strict rules and ritual requirements. The goal was not to kill as many enemies as possible, but to capture them alive, to take prisoners who could be brought back to Tenochtitlán for the most sacred of all purposes. For the Aztecs believed that the gods required human sacrifice to maintain the cosmic order, and warriors, captured in battle, were the most precious offerings that could be made to the divine powers. This need for prisoners led to a unique form of warfare known as the Flower Wars, conflicts that were fought not for territorial gain, but for the specific purpose of capturing enemies for sacrifice. These battles were arranged in advance, fought at agreed-upon times and places, governed by rules that both sides understood and respected. They were deadly serious contests, but they were also religious ceremonies, ways of honoring the gods. While demonstrating the martial prowess of the empire's warriors, the expansion of the Aztec Empire was not random, but carefully planned, driven by both strategic considerations and religious imperatives. The Mexica sought to control the trade routes that brought precious goods from the far corners of Mesoamerica, to secure sources of tribute that would fund the empire's growing needs, and to spread the worship of their gods to peoples who had never heard the name of Huitzilopochtli. They moved outward from their heartland around Lake Texcoco like ripples spreading across still water, each new conquest making the next one easier. Cities that had watched the destruction of their neighbors were more likely to submit without a fight. Peoples who had seen the benefits of Aztec rule were more likely to remain loyal when new challenges arose. The empire grew to encompass most of central Mexico, stretching from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific, from the deserts of the north to the tropical forests of the south. It included dozens of different ethnic groups, hundreds of different cities, millions of people who had never seen Tenochtitlán, but who acknowledged its emperor as their overlord, and its gods as supreme among the divine powers. But this expansion came at a cost. The constant warfare required enormous resources, both human and material. The need for prisoners for sacrifice created a cycle of violence that could never be fully satisfied. The empire's success bred enemies as well as allies, peoples who waited for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to throw off the Aztec yoke and reclaim their independence. The Aztec military was magnificently equipped and superbly trained, but it was also stretched thin across vast distances, forced to maintain order among peoples who had their own proud traditions and their own reasons for resentment. The empire's very success contained the seeds of its eventual downfall, for it created more enemies than it could permanently suppress, more obligations than it could indefinitely fulfill. Yet for now, in the golden age of Aztec power, the empire seemed invincible. Its armies were victorious wherever they marched. Its cities grew wealthy on the tribute of conquered peoples. Its gods were honored from the shores of the Atlantic to the beaches of the Pacific. The sound of war drums echoed across the mountains and valleys of Mexico, carrying the message that the Mexica had fulfilled their destiny, that the wandering people had become the masters of the world. In the temples of Tenochtitlán, the priests offered prayers of thanksgiving for these victories, acknowledging that all success came from the gods, that all glory belonged to the divine powers who had chosen the Mexica as their instruments on earth. The empire had been built by human hands, but it was sustained by divine will, and as long as the gods smiled upon their chosen people, no earthly force could stand against them. In the deepest hours of the night, when the lake lies dark as obsidian and the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, the priests of Tenochtitlan begin their most sacred work. Their voices rise in ancient chants that seem to come from the very stones of the temple, prayers that have been spoken without interruption since the first Mexica set foot on their promised island. These are the guardians of the divine mysteries, the keepers of the knowledge that holds the universe together, the men who understand that the boundary between the world of mortals and the realm of the gods is as thin as the skin of a soap bubble. To understand the Aztec people, you must understand their gods, for in their world, the divine and the human are not separate realms, but different aspects of a single cosmic reality. The gods are not distant beings dwelling in some far-off heaven, but living forces that move through every aspect of daily life, present in the wind that ripples the lake, the fire that burns in the hearth, the blood that flows through human veins. At the center of this divine cosmos stands Huitzilopochtli, the god who guided the Mexica to their promised land, the deity of war and the sun, whose strength allows each new day to dawn. Picture him as the Aztecs did, a figure of terrible beauty, his skin the color of turquoise, his body adorned with the feathers of hummingbirds, his face painted with the sacred colors of dawn. He carries in his hands the weapons of war and the instruments of creation. For in the Aztec understanding, these are not opposites, but complementary forces. Huitzilopochtli is locked in an eternal struggle with the forces of darkness, fighting each night to ensure that the sun will rise again, battling the star demons who seek to prevent the dawn. This struggle is not symbolic but literal, not metaphorical but real, and the outcome is never certain. The sun might fail to rise. World might be plunged into eternal darkness, unless the people provide their God with the strength he needs to continue his cosmic battle. And that strength comes from the most precious gift that mortals can offer, human life itself. The Aztecs believed that blood was the food of the gods, that the beating heart was the source of all vitality, that the life force that animated human beings was the same energy that kept the stars in their courses and the seasons in their proper order. To give a life to the gods was not an act of cruelty, but of cosmic necessity, not a sacrifice, but a sharing of the most precious thing human beings possess. But Huitzilopochtli did not stand alone in the Aztec pantheon. Beside him was Tlaloc, the ancient rain god whose domain encompassed all the waters of the earth, from the great lake that surrounded Tenochtitlan to the smallest mountain stream. Tlaloc was older than the Mexica themselves, a deity worshipped by the peoples of Mesoamerica for thousands of years before the first Aztecs set foot in the Valley of Mexico. Picture Tlaloc as a figure of elemental power, his face decorated with the symbolic fangs of the jaguar, his eyes rimmed with the sacred circles that represent the life-giving rain. He dwells in the mountains where the clouds gather, in the caves where the springs emerge from the earth, in the storms that bring both life and destruction to the world below. He is gentle and terrible by turns, capable of blessing the fields with gentle rain or destroying them with devastating floods. The partnership between Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, represented in the twin temples that crowned the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlán, embodied the essential duality of Aztec religion: the sun and the rain, war and agriculture, the sky and the fee. Earth, the imported god of the nomadic Mexica, and the ancient deity of the settled peoples they had joined. This was not a religion of simple answers, but of complex relationships, not a faith of absolute truths, but of eternal tensions that had to be carefully balanced. Beyond these two great gods stretched a pantheon of divine beings as complex and varied as the empire itself. There was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wisdom and learning, patron of priests and scholars, the deity who had given humanity the gift of knowledge and the burden of consciousness. He was depicted as a figure of serene beauty, his body covered with precious feathers, his face kind and thoughtful, his hands holding the tools of writing and calculation. There was Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, god of night and conflict, the divine force that brought both creation and destruction, the deity who tested mortals with challenges that could either destroy them or make them stronger. He was shown as a figure of dark magnificence, his body painted with the colors of obsidian, one foot replaced by a serpent, his chest decorated with the mirror that could reveal the hidden truths of the heart. There was Quetzalcoatl, the flower, feather, goddess of love and beauty, patron of artists and lovers, the divine force that brought joy and creativity into the world. She was depicted as eternally young and beautiful, her body adorned with flowers and butterflies, her face radiant with the happiness that comes from following one's true passion. And there were hundreds of others, each with their own domain, their own ceremonies, their own devoted followers among the diverse peoples of the empire. The gods of the Aztecs were not a unified pantheon, but a collection of divine forces that reflected the complexity of the world they governed. The variety of human experience, the countless ways that mortals could encounter the sacred in their daily lives. The ceremonies that honored these gods were as varied as the deities themselves. There were daily offerings of flowers and incense, prayers spoken at dawn and dusk, simple rituals that any person could perform in their own home garden. There were elaborate festivals that lasted for days, involving the entire city in celebrations that combined religious devotion with artistic expression, athletic competition, and communal feasting. But it was the practice of human sacrifice that set Aztec religion apart from the faiths of other peoples, that made it seem both magnificent and terrible to those who encountered it. The Aztecs practiced sacrifice, not from cruelty, but from love. Not from a desire to destroy, but from a need to preserve. Not from hatred of life, but from a profound understanding of what life truly meant. They believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, that the sun and moon had been born from divine blood, that the earth itself had been formed from the body of a goddess who had given her life so that mortals could exist. If the gods had sacrificed themselves for humanity, then humanity must be willing to sacrifice itself for the gods. This was not a transaction but a communion, not a payment, but a sharing of the most precious gift that existed. The most sacred of all sacrifices took place at the top of the Great Pyramid, where the twin temples of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc looked out over the lake and the city below. Here, in ceremonies that combined religious devotion with artistic beauty, warriors captured in battle were offered to the gods in rituals that were designed to honor both the sacrifice and the one who was sacrificed. The victim was not seen as a criminal being punished, but as a chosen one being elevated, not as an enemy being destroyed, but as a messenger being sent to the gods. They were treated with honor and respect, fed the finest foods, dressed in the Aztec, most beautiful clothing, given every comfort and luxury that the empire could provide. For in the Aztec understanding, they were about to become divine themselves, to join the eternal dance of the gods in the realm beyond mortal sight. The ceremony itself was conducted with solemn dignity, every gesture carefully choreographed, every word precisely spoken. The priests who performed the sacrifice were not executioners, but sacred intermediaries, men who had spent their entire lives learning the proper ways to commune with the divine. They understood that they were not taking a life, but transforming it, not ending a story, but beginning a new chapter in the eternal narrative of creation. The heart, still beating, was lifted toward the sky as an offering to the gods, its warmth and vitality, a gift that would give strength to the divine forces that kept the world in motion. The blood was allowed to flow down the steps of the pyramid, carrying with it the life force that would nourish the earth and ensure the continuation of all life. This was not waste, but sacred recycling, not destruction, but transformation, not death, but a different kind of life. To modern minds, such practices seem horrific, but to the Aztecs, they were acts of profound love and cosmic responsibility. They saw themselves as partners with the gods in the great work of maintaining the universe, as conscious participants in the eternal cycle of creation and destruction that governed all existence. They understood that everything has a price, that all gifts must be reciprocated, that the universe itself is built on the principle of sacred exchange. This was a religion of adults, not children, a faith that faced the harsh realities of existence without flinching, that acknowledged the darkness as well as the light, that understood that love and sacrifice are not opposites, but different aspects of the same divine truth. It was a religion that transformed every aspect of life into a sacred act, that saw the divine in the ordinary, that made every moment a potential encounter with the eternal. As the soft light of dawn begins to filter through the mist that perpetually hovers over Lake Texcoco, we find ourselves standing at the very heart of Tenochtitlán, where the greatest architectural wonder of the Aztec world rises from the sacred earth like a mountain made by human hands. This is the Templo Mayor, known to the Aztecs as Teocalli, the Great Temple, and it stands as the most magnificent bridge between the earthly realm and the divine heavens above. Close your eyes and imagine yourself as a morning visitor to this sacred precinct 5 centuries ago. The air is crisp with the coolness of the lake, and the scent of copal incense drifts on the gentle breeze. Before you rises a structure so grand, so imposing, that it seems to touch the very clouds themselves. The Templo Mayor is not merely a building, but a living mountain, a sacred geography that the Aztecs believed connected their world to the realm of the gods. The temple rises in 7 distinct levels, each representing a different layer of this heavens, climbing 90 feet into the sky like a massive stairway for the gods themselves. Its design is a masterpiece of symmetry and spiritual symbolism. Picture 2 pyramids, standing side by side yet joined at their base, creating a double temple that speaks to the very heart of Aztec cosmology. These twin structures represent the sacred mountains of their mythology, rising from a vast platform that stretches across the ceremonial center of the city. As you gaze upward at this architectural marvel, you notice how the morning sun catches the carefully carved volcanic stone, casting long shadows that seem to dance across the temple's stepped faces. The left pyramid, painted in brilliant blue and white, honors Tlaloc, the ancient rain god whose power brings life to the crops and water to the people. The right pyramid, adorned in red and white, is dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the fierce god of war and the sun, patron deity of the Mexica people. The stones themselves tell stories, each one carefully chosen and placed by master builders who understood that they were creating more than mere architecture. They were building a cosmic center, a place where the earthly and divine worlds could meet and commune. The temple was dedicated simultaneously to Huitzilopochtli, god of war, and Tlaloc, god of rain and agriculture. each of which had a shrine at the temple's summit, representing the fundamental duality that the Aztecs saw governing all existence. As you begin to climb the steep stone steps, worn smooth by countless pilgrims over the centuries, you feel the weight of history beneath your feet. Each step upward is a step closer to the divine, and the city below gradually spreads out like a vast map of human achievement. The canals glisten like silver threads in the morning light, and the gardens of the floating chinampas create a patchwork of green that stretches to the horizon. The climb is deliberate and meditative, much like the spiritual journey it represents. The Aztecs believed that as one ascended these sacred steps, they were literally climbing from the earthly realm through the various levels of heaven. The priests who made this journey daily understood that they were not merely climbing a building, but ascending a cosmic ladder that connected the world of humans to the realm of the gods. Standing about 90 feet high, the majestic structure consisted of two-stepped pyramids rising side by side on a huge platform. It dominated both the sacred precinct and the entire city. From this vantage point, the temple served as both a spiritual center and a powerful symbol of Aztec authority. Visible from every corner of Tenochtitlán and beyond. At the temple's base, you can see the evidence of continuous construction and renovation. The Aztecs followed a sacred tradition of enlarging their great temple periodically, building new layers over the old, like the growth rings of a mighty tree. Archaeological discoveries have revealed that the Templo Mayor was actually a series of temples, each generation adding to the grandeur of their predecessors, creating a structure that grew more magnificent with each passing reign. The craftsmanship, evident in every carved stone and painted surface, speaks to the devotion of the builders. Skilled artisans spent years carving intricate glyphs and images into the volcanic rock, creating a visual language that told the stories of gods and heroes, of cosmic battles and divine victories. The walls themselves became books, readable by those who understood the sacred symbols, telling the epic tales of creation and the ongoing struggle between order and chaos. As you continue your ascent, the sounds of the city below gradually fade, replaced by the whisper of wind through the temple's stone passages and the distant chanting of priests performing their sacred duties. The atmosphere grows increasingly solemn and mystical, as if the very air becomes thinner and more sacred with each step toward the heavens. The priests who served at this temple were not merely religious officials, but cosmic engineers, responsible for maintaining the delicate balance between the earthly and divine realms. They understood that their daily rituals and ceremonies were not just acts of worship, but essential maintenance of the universe itself. Every dawn, they would climb these same steps to ensure that the sun would rise, that the rains would come, and that the cosmic order would continue. The spiritual navel, or omphalos, of the Mexica Aztec Empire was Templo Mayor, a great basalt-stepped pyramid whose flat top supported two shrines to the all-powerful gods, Tlaloc, Lord of Rain, and Huitzilopochtli, Lord of War, patron of the Mexica people. This was literally the center of their world, the point from which all other sacred and secular power flowed. The temple's design incorporated sophisticated astronomical alignments, with certain chambers and passages oriented to capture the light of specific stars and planets at crucial moments in the ritual calendar. The Aztecs were master astronomers, and their great temple served as both a place of worship and a cosmic observatory, allowing the priests to track the movements of celestial bodies and predict the proper times for ceremonies and agricultural activities. As you reach the upper levels of the temple, the twin shrines come into view, each one a perfect architectural expression of the god it honors. The shrine to Tlaloc, with its blue and white coloring, evokes the sky and clouds. Wow! Decorative elements include symbols of rain, lightning, and the precious jade that represented water and fertility. The shrine to Huitzilopochtli, painted in the red and white that symbolized blood and bone, displays the imagery of war and solar power, with carved eagles and jaguars representing the warrior orders that served the temple. The flat summits of these twin pyramids were the stages for the most sacred ceremonies of the Aztec religion. Here, against the backdrop of the vast sky, the priests would perform the rituals that they believed kept the universe in motion. The morning ceremonies welcomed the sun god's daily journey across the heavens, while evening rituals ensured his safe passage through the underworld during the night. These ceremonies were elaborate affairs that engaged all the senses. The air would be thick with copal incense, creating aromatic clouds that were believed to carry prayers to the gods. Conch shell trumpets would sound across the city, their deep, resonant notes calling the faithful to witness the sacred rites. Drums made from hollowed logs and stretched jaguar skins would beat in complex rhythms that matched the cosmic heartbeat of the universe. The sacrificial ceremonies at Templo Mayor were elaborate events that involved not just the act of sacrifice itself, but also extensive preparations and rituals. Victims, often captives from wars or tributes, were honored before their deaths. They were adorned with fine clothing and given a place of honor in the ceremonial processions that would wind through the city. Before culminating at the temple's summit, the priests themselves were impressive figures, their bodies painted with sacred designs, their hair long and matted with the blood of previous ceremonies. They wore elaborate costumes that transformed them into living representations of the gods they served, becoming the bridge between the human and divine realms. Their movements were choreographed with precision, each gesture carrying deep symbolic meaning that had been passed down through generations of sacred tradition. As night falls over the great temple, the stone structure takes on an ethereal quality in the moonlight. The shadows cast by the twin pyramids create geometric patterns on the plaza below, while the stars above seem to mirror the careful alignments built into the temple's architecture. In this moment of peaceful transition from day to night, the Templo Mayor stands as a testament to the Aztec understanding of the cosmos as a place of beautiful, terrible, and necessary balance. The legacy of this great temple extends far beyond its physical destruction by the Spanish conquistadors. Though the stones were scattered and the shrines demolished, the spiritual power of the Templo Mayor continues to resonate in the heart of Mexico City, where its foundations still lie beneath the modern cathedral and plaza. However, the discovery of the Coyolxauhqui monolith in 1978 catalyzed the push for full excavation. This massive disk, depicting Huitzilopochtli's sister, a mythical figure associated with the moon and fertility, weighed an astonishing 8.5 metric tons and revealed the incredible artistic and spiritual sophistication of the Aztec builders. As you rest now, imagine the gentle sound of wind moving through the stone passages of the great temple, carrying with it the echoes of centuries of prayer and ceremony. The Templo Mayor stands in your mind's eye as a symbol of human ambition to reach beyond the earthly realm and touch the divine, a magnificent bridge between earth and sky that continues to inspire wonder and reverence even in our modern age. In the peaceful darkness of night, the great temple keeps its eternal vigil, a monument to faith, artistry, and the enduring human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. The twin gods still watch over the land from their celestial realm, and the sacred mountain they once inhabited continues to rise in spirit, if not in stone, toward the infinite stars above. As the morning mist lifts from the surface of Lake Texcoco, revealing the tranquil waterways that thread through Tenochtitlán like silver ribbons, we find ourselves drifting into the heart of Aztec daily life. The city awakens not with the harsh sounds of modern machinery, but with the gentle splash of wooden paddles cutting through calm water, the soft murmur of voices carrying across the lake, and the distant call of waterbirds settling into their morning routines. Imagine, if you will, floating slowly along one of these ancient canals in the early hours of dawn. The air is cool and sweet, carrying the scent of water lily and the earthy richness of fertile soil. Along the banks, we see the most remarkable sight, gardens that seem to float upon the water itself, their green abundance swaying gently with each ripple. These are the chinampas, the floating gardens that fed an empire. Built upon small, rectangular plots of fertile arable soil, cultivated on the shallow lake beds. These ingenious farms supported diverse crops, including maize, beans, chilies, tomatoes, squash, and edible greens in meticulously planned plots. The Aztecs created these marvels by weaving together reeds and branches, then anchoring them to the lake bottom with wooden stakes. Over time, they layered mud and sediment from the lake floor, creating islands of incredibly rich soil that seemed to float like green jewels upon the water. Picture a farmer in the early morning light, his silhouette dark against the pale sky as he poles his narrow canoe between the garden plots. His movements are practiced and serene, each stroke of the paddle precise and economical. He tends to his crops with the careful attention of someone who understands that these floating gardens are not merely fields, but living ecosystems that require harmony between water, soil, and plant. The Chinampa system was a marvel of agricultural engineering that modern farmers still study today. These man-made plots of land were built up from the sedimentation from the bottom of the lake, with the Aztecs creating large reed mats as the foundation. The roots of the crops would eventually grow down through the soil and into the water below, creating a natural irrigation system that never failed. On these floating gardens, the Aztecs grew the foods that would sustain their great civilization. Maize, the sacred corn that was central to their creation myths, grew in tall, graceful stalks that rustled gently in the lake breeze. Beans climbed wooden poles in spiraling patterns, their leaves creating natural shade for the squash that spread across the rich earth below. Tomatoes, still unknown to the rest of the world, ripened in the warm sun, their red globes adding splashes of color to the green tapestry. The farmers worked in harmony with the rhythms of the lake and sky. They understood the subtle signs that told them when to plant, when to harvest, when to let the earth rest. Their knowledge was passed down through generations, each family maintaining its own collection of garden plots, each plot a small world of carefully balanced life. But the Chinampas were not just practical, they were beautiful. Vibrant flowers, crucial to Aztec religious ceremonies and daily life, flourished alongside the food crops. Marigolds blazed like small suns, their orange petals catching the morning light. Exotic blooms in shades of purple, red, and yellow created a living rainbow that reflected in the still water. As the sun climbs higher, our gentle journey takes us toward the heart of the city, where the canals converge near the great marketplace of Tlatelolco. Here, the quiet agricultural rhythms give way to the bustling energy of commerce. But even this energy has a different quality than the frantic pace of modern life. The marketplace at Tlatelolco was so important that it never stopped. Day and night, there were at least 20,000 people. And on the major weekly market days, this number rose to nearly 60,000. Yet despite these numbers, the Spanish chroniclers who witnessed it described a place of remarkable order and civility. Picture yourself walking through this ancient marketplace in the gentle warmth of mid-morning. The pathways are wide and clean, organized into distinct sections where different types of goods are sold. The bustling atmosphere was filled with the sounds of bargaining, the scents of various foods, and the vibrant colors of textiles and pottery. But these are not harsh sounds. They are the musical tones of a civilization that valued courtesy and respect in all interactions. In one section, you might find yourself among the sellers of produce fresh from the Chinampas. All kinds of utilitarian goods were sold, such as cloth, garden produce, food animals, obsidian knives and tools, medicines, wood, leather, furs, and animal skins, precious metals, gems, and pottery. The vendors arrange their goods with an artist's eye for beauty, creating displays that are as pleasing to look at as they are practical. An elderly woman sits cross-legged behind a carefully arranged collection of chilies, some dried and dark red, others fresh and gleaming green. Her weathered hands come out through the peppers with the gentle precision of long practice. When a customer approaches, she greets them with the formal courtesy that marked all Aztec social interactions, inquiring about their family's health, before discussing the qualities of her wares. Nearby, a young man tends to baskets filled with cocoa beans, the currency of the empire. He counts them with the meditative rhythm of someone performing a sacred ritual, which in a way he is. Cacao beans and cotton cloaks serve as various types of money, and handling them required both mathematical precision and spiritual respect for the gifts of the gods. As we wander deeper into the market, we encounter the craftsmen whose skills transformed raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. A potter shapes clay with movements that seem almost like a dance, his hands guided by techniques passed down through countless generations. The clay responds to his touch, becoming vessels that will hold water, store grain, or serve food at family gatherings. In another section, weavers work at their looms, their fingers flying as they create textiles of extraordinary complexity and beauty. The threads they use are dyed with colors derived from insects, plants, and minerals, deep crimsons from cochineal, brilliant blues from indigo, sunny yellows from various flowers. Each textile tells a story, its patterns encoding information about the weaver's family, their city, their place in the great tapestry of Aztec society. The featherworkers occupy a special place in the marketplace, their craft considered one of the highest arts. They work with feathers from birds found throughout the empire, the brilliant green of quetzal feathers, the deep red of cardinal plumage, the iridescent blue-black of grackle feathers. With infinite patience, they attach each feather to a backing, creating images and patterns that seem to glow with inner light. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the marketplace is its gentle civility. Despite the crowds and the constant activity, there is an underlying rhythm of respect and courtesy. Buyers and sellers engaged in haggling, which was a common practice, as prices were not fixed and dependent on supply and demand dynamics. Yet, this negotiation is conducted with a graceful formality that transforms commerce into a kind of social dance. As the day progresses and the sun reaches its zenith, many of the market-goers begin to make their way home, their purchases carefully balanced in baskets or bundled in cotton cloths. The afternoon brings a different rhythm to Aztec life, a time for family, for rest, for the quiet activities that bind communities together. In the residential areas of Tenochtitlán, away from the grand temples and palaces, life unfolds with a gentle domesticity that would be familiar to families throughout history. Children play along the edges of the canals, their laughter echoing across the water. They practice the games that will prepare them for adult life, boys learning to handle canoes and practice with wooden weapons, girls learning to weave and cook and manage household affairs. The Aztec home was a place of warmth and family connection. Built around a central courtyard, it provided both privacy and communal space. In the evening, as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, families gather for the main meal of the day. They sit on reed mats, sharing food from ceramic bowls, the conversation flowing as naturally as the water in the canals. Outside, the meal itself reflects the abundance of the chinampas and the diversity of the empire's trade networks. Tortillas, made from corn ground on atates, provide the foundation for the meal. They are filled with beans, squash, tomatoes, and chilies, creating flavors that are both satisfying and complex. Those who can afford it might add small amounts of meat, turkey, duck, or fish from the Lake chocolate, prepared as a frothy drink, is reserved for special occasions and important guests. The preparation itself is a ritual, the cocoa beans ground and mixed with water, sometimes flavored with vanilla or chilies, and whisked until foam forms on the surface. The drink is served in beautifully decorated gourd cups, and consuming it is considered both a pleasure and a spiritual act. As darkness falls over the lake, the city settles into its evening rhythms. Families gather around small fires, their faces illuminated by the gentle flames. Elders tell stories that pass down the wisdom of generations, tales of gods and heroes, of the great migration that brought the Aztecs to this promised land, of the proper way to live in harmony with the natural world. Young people receive their formal education in schools called Kamakak and Telpochkali, where they learn not just practical skills, but also the ethical principles that should guide their lives. Boys learn about warfare and governance, but also about poetry, music, and the complex calendar systems that regulate religious and agricultural life. Girls learn about household management and childcare, but also about the healing arts and the proper conduct of religious ceremonies. Education in Aztec society was not merely about acquiring knowledge, it was about becoming a complete person, someone who could contribute to the harmony and prosperity of the community. Teachers emphasized self-discipline, respect for others, and the importance of finding one's proper place in the social order. As we draw near the end of our gentle exploration of Aztec daily life, we find ourselves once again floating on the quiet waters of Lake Texcoco. The city around us has settled into the peaceful rhythms of night. Cooking fires flickering windows, their smoke rising straight up in the still air. The sounds of the day have faded to a gentle murmur, the distant call of night birds, the soft splash of a late canoe returning home, the whisper of wind through the reeds. The Aztecs understood something that our modern world often forgets, that daily life is not separate from the sacred, that the simple activities of farming, cooking, teaching, and caring for family are themselves forms of worship. In their world, every meal was a gift from the gods, every successful harvest a miracle to be celebrated, every child a link in the chain that connected the living to the ancestors, and to the generations yet to come. Their society was built on principles of reciprocity and balance. The farmer's skill in tending the chinampas was matched by the craftsman's artistry in the marketplace. The merchant's knowledge of distant lands complemented the teacher's wisdom about human nature. The warrior's strength protected the poet's gentle words. Each person had a role to play, and the health of the whole depended on each person fulfilling their role with skill and dedication. As we float here in the gathering darkness, listening to the gentle lap of water against the chinampa edges, we can almost hear the echoes of that ancient world, the soft voices of farmers checking their crops one last time before sleep, the lullabies that mothers sang to their children, the quiet prayers offered to the gods who watched over this great city on the water. The Aztec understanding of daily life was fundamentally different from our own. They saw themselves not as individuals pursuing separate goals, but as part of a great web of relationships that included not just other humans, but the natural world, the ancestors, and the gods themselves. Every action had consequences that rippled outward through this web, and every person bore responsibility for maintaining the harmony of the whole. This sense of interconnectedness shaped every aspect of their daily existence. The farmer who tended the chinampas was not just growing food. He was participating in the great cycle of life that connected earth and water, plant and animal, human and divine. The merchant who traveled to distant lands was not just trading goods. He was weaving the threads that bound the empire together. The mother who taught her children was not just passing on practical skills. She was preserving the cultural wisdom that would guide future generations. In our modern world, we often feel disconnected from these larger rhythms and purposes. We rush through our days, focused on immediate goals and concerns, rarely pausing to consider our place in the great web of existence. But there is something deeply restful about imagining a world where every daily activity was infused with meaning, where the simple act of preparing a meal or tending a garden was understood as a form of sacred participation in the ongoing creation of the world. As sleep begins to claim us, floating here on the peaceful waters of an ancient lake, we carry with us the gentle wisdom of the Aztecs, the understanding that a life well lived is not measured by grand achievements or dramatic gestures, but by the care and attention we bring to the simple, daily acts of living. In the end, it is these quiet moments of connection to family, to community, to the natural world that give life its deepest meaning and greatest joy. The floating gardens remain quietly in the darkness, their roots reaching deep into the fertile mud, their leaves stirring gently in the night breeze. Tomorrow will bring another day of patient tending, another cycle of planting and harvest, another opportunity to participate in the great dance of existence. For now, there is only the peace of night on the water and the promise of morning yet to come. The morning mist clings to the eastern shores of the great empire, where the waves of the vast ocean meet the ancient lands of Mesoamerica. As we drift on the gentle currents of time, we find ourselves in the early months of 1519, when the rhythm of Aztec life was about to encounter something entirely unprecedented, strangers from across the endless waters, bearing with them the seeds of profound change. Picture, if you will, the coastal waters off what the Spanish would later call Veracruz. The Caribbean Sea stretches endlessly eastward, its surface broken only by the occasional dolphin's arc or the graceful flight of pelicans skimming the waves. The morning sun casts long shadows across the water, creating paths of gold that seem to lead to distant, unknowable shores. It was into this tranquil seascape that 11 ships appeared on the horizon in February 1519, their white sails catching the morning breeze like clouds that had somehow descended to kiss the waves. These vessels carried an expedition of 11 ships and 500 men, led by a Spanish conquistador named Hernan Cortes, inspired by rumors of gold and the existence of large, sophisticated cities in the Mexican interior. From the shore, the indigenous people watched these strange vessels with a mixture of curiosity and wonder. Ships were unknown to them. Their own vessels were canoes carved from single trees, elegant and swift, but nothing like these floating houses with their billowing white wings. The sight must have been both beautiful and unsettling, like watching mountains move across the water. Cortes and his crew reached the Mexican coast at Yucatan in February 1519, where they first encountered the domain of Mayan-speaking peoples before making their way to Tabasco, where Cortes gained intelligence from locals about the land he desired to explore. The Spanish were eager to establish themselves in this new territory, driven by dreams of gold and glory, but also by a fervent desire to spread their Christian faith to these unknown peoples. The first encounters between the Spanish and the coastal peoples were marked by a cautious diplomacy punctuated by misunderstandings. Neither side could speak the other's language, and so they communicated through gestures, gifts, and the universal language of trade. The Spanish offered glass beads, mirrors, and metal tools, objects that seemed magical to people who had never seen their like. In return, they received food, cotton textiles, and small ornaments of gold that set their hearts racing with anticipation. But it was not just material goods that were exchanged in these early meetings. Each side studied the other with the intense curiosity of scholars encountering a completely new form of life. The Spanish marveled at the sophisticated textiles, the intricate featherwork, the mathematical precision of the calendar stones. The indigenous people were equally fascinated by the Spanish horses, creatures they had never seen before, which seemed to be part man, part beast, moving with a grace and power that suggested supernatural origins. As the weeks passed, word of vast. These strange visitors spread inland along the ancient trade routes that connected the coast to the great cities of the interior. Runners carried the news from village to village, their messages growing more elaborate and mysterious with each telling. They spoke of floating houses, of men with pale skin and faces covered in hair, of four-legged beasts that could carry a person faster than any human could run. These reports eventually reached the ears of the great Moctezuma II, ruler of the Aztec Empire, in his palace at Tenochtitlan. The meeting between Aztec King Montezuma and Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés would prove to be one of the most consequential in history, affecting the welfare, beliefs, and culture of millions of people living in the Western Hemisphere. But in those early days, as the first reports filtered in, Moctezuma could hardly have imagined the magnitude of what was approaching. Aztec Emperor was a man of great intelligence and sophistication, ruling over an empire that stretched from coast to coast and included millions of people. His palace was filled with treasures from across Mesoamerica, jade from the south, obsidian from the volcanic highlands, precious feathers from the tropical forests, gold from the mountains. He was accustomed to receiving tribute from distant lands, to dealing with foreign ambassadors, to managing the complex politics of a vast empire. Yet, these reports from the coast described something entirely outside his experience. The Spanish, with their metal armor, their gunpowder weapons, their horses, and their ships, represented a technology and a worldview that had no precedent in Mesoamerican history. They came from a land that existed beyond the edge of the known world, from a civilization that had developed in complete isolation from the people of the Americas. As spring turned to summer in 1519, Cortés and his men made their way inland, following the ancient trade routes that led toward the heart of the Aztec Empire. Their journey took them through landscapes of breathtaking beauty, coastal plains dotted with palm trees, mountains shrouded in mist, valleys where rivers wound like silver ribbons through fields of corn and beans. Along the way, they encountered the various people who lived within the broad sphere of Aztec influence. Some of these groups welcomed the Spanish as potential allies against Aztec domination, for the empire was built on tribute and conquest, and not all of its subjects were happy with their subordinate status. The key to Cortés' eventual success lay in the political crisis within the Aztec Empire. Cortés was able to leverage the resentment of many of the subject peoples who had to pay tribute to the Aztecs. Others viewed the Spanish with suspicion and fear. These strangers brought with them not just new weapons and animals, but new diseases against which the indigenous peoples had no immunity. Without understanding the cause, entire communities began to fall ill with smallpox, measles, and other European diseases that would ultimately kill millions of people across the Americas. As the Spanish expedition drew closer to Tenochtitlan, Moctezuma faced a dilemma that would have challenged any ruler. How should he respond to these unprecedented visitors? Were they traders, explorers, or conquerors? Were they men like themselves, or did they possess supernatural powers that made them dangerous to oppose? The question of the Spanish identity became entangled with Aztec religious beliefs and prophecies. According to some accounts recorded by Franciscan friars in the 1540s, Mexican ambassadors gave Cortés a costume representing Quetzalcoatl when he first arrived on the coast, and when Cortés arrived at Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, some believed that Cortés might be the god Quetzalcoatl in human form. However, there's no contemporary evidence that Moctezuma actually thought Cortés was in any sense divine, and no contemporary document mentions Quetzalcoatl or suggests that any indigenous person thought Cortés was a god. The truth was likely far more complex and nuanced than the simplified stories that would later emerge. Moctezuma was a sophisticated ruler who understood politics, diplomacy, and the management of diverse peoples. He was probably trying to navigate a delicate situation, treating the Spanish with the respect due to powerful strangers while gathering intelligence about their intentions and capabilities. As autumn approached, the Spanish expedition finally reached the shores of Lake Texcoco, where they caught their first glimpse of the great city of Tenochtitlán. The sight must have taken their breath away. Rising from the blue waters of the lake, connected to the shore by long causeways that seemed to walk on water, the city was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its pyramids and palaces gleamed in the afternoon sun, while canoes moved like water striders across the lake's surface. For the Aztecs watching from their city, the approach of the Spanish must have been equally remarkable. The conquistadors rode on horseback, their metal armor glinting in the sunlight, their banners fluttering in the lake breeze. Behind them came their indigenous allies, thousands of warriors from the various groups that had joined the Spanish cause. It was a procession unlike any that had ever approached the sacred city. On November 8, 1519, after 8 months of battles and negotiations, Cortes arrived in Tenochtitlan, where he was welcomed by Montezuma with great pomp and ceremony. The emperor gave him lavish gifts and accommodations in one of his palaces. The meeting took place at the entrance to the city, where the great causeway met the shore. Picture that moment. 2 men, representing 2 totally different worlds, meeting for the first time on a stone causeway surrounded by the glittering waters of an ancient lake. Moctezuma, dressed in the elaborate regalia of Aztec royalty, his feathered headdress catching the morning light, his golden ornaments reflecting the sun. Cortes in his steel armor, his beard neatly trimmed, his eyes taking in every detail of the magnificent city before him. The formal greeting between the 2 leaders was conducted with all the ceremony befitting such a momentous occasion. Moctezuma, according to Aztec custom, approached with measured steps, his nobles walking behind him in strict order of precedence. The Spanish, unfamiliar with these protocols, nevertheless recognized the gravity of the moment and responded with their own formal courtesy. Gifts were exchanged, gold and precious stones from the Aztec treasury, steel blades and glass beads from the Spanish ships. Each side was trying to demonstrate their wealth and power, to impress the other with their sophistication and capabilities. Yet beneath the diplomatic politeness, both men were making careful calculations about the intentions and strength of their counterparts. The Spanish were amazed by the wealth and organization of Tenochtitlan. Walking through the city's streets, they saw markets filled with goods from across the empire, workshops where skilled artisans created objects of breathtaking beauty, schools where young people learned the complex skills needed to maintain their civilization. It was clear that they had encountered not a simple tribal society, but a sophisticated empire with its own rich culture and advanced technologies. For the Aztecs, the Spanish represented a puzzle that grew more complex with each passing day. These strangers possessed remarkable technologies. Their steel weapons could cut through obsidian blades. Their horses could carry them faster than any human could run. Their ships could cross vast oceans. Yet they also seemed strangely ignorant of basic principles of civilized life, unfamiliar with the proper ways to conduct diplomatic relations, unaware of the sacred nature of certain places and objects. As the days passed, the tension beneath the surface of diplomatic courtesy began to grow. The Spanish, for all their wonder at Aztec achievements, were ultimately driven by their desire for gold and their determination to impose their own religion and political system on the people. They saw the Aztec temples as monuments to false gods that needed to be destroyed, the Aztec political system as a tyranny that needed to be overthrown. The Aztecs, meanwhile, gradually came to understand that these visitors were not simply exotic traders or explorers, but representatives of a vast empire that lay beyond the ocean, an empire with its own aggressive ambitions and its own claim to divine authority. The Spanish spoke of a distant king who ruled over many lands, of a god who demanded exclusive worship, of a destiny that required the transformation of the entire world. The meeting between Quartz and Moctezuma was not just an encounter between two individuals, but a collision between two entire civilizations, each with its own understanding of how the world worked, each with its own vision of what the future should look like. Neither side fully understood the other, and neither side was prepared for the consequences of their meeting. As we float here on the peaceful waters of memory, watching the sun set over the great city of Tenochtitlán on that fateful November day in 1519, we can sense the weight of history settling over the lake like evening mist. The world that both men knew was about to change forever, though neither could have imagined the scope and tragedy of what was to come. The encounter between the Spanish and the Aztecs was marked by a fundamental misunderstanding that would have profound consequences for both civilizations. Each side interpreted the other's actions through the lens of their own cultural assumptions, creating a spiral of misunderstanding that would ultimately lead to conflict and tragedy. Yet in those first moments of meeting, there was also a recognition of shared humanity. Both Quartz and Moctezuma were intelligent, sophisticated men who understood the responsibilities of leadership. Both were trying to navigate an unprecedented situation with wisdom and care for their people. Both were seeking to understand strangers, who seemed to come from another world entirely. As the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky above Lake Texcoco, we can imagine the conversations that must have taken place that evening in the palaces of Tenochtitlan. Spanish soldiers, far from home, writing letters to families they might never see again, describing wonders they could barely comprehend. Aztec nobles, debating in hushed tones the meaning of these strange visitors and the implications of their presence for the future of their empire. The meeting of two worlds is always a momentous event, filled with both promise and peril. In the case of the Spanish and the Aztecs, it would ultimately lead to the destruction of one civilization and the transformation of the other. But in those first days, when everything was still possible, when the future remained unwritten, there was a brief moment when two great civilizations looked at each other across the divide of language and culture and recognized something of themselves in the other. As sleep begins to claim us, floating here on the timeless waters of an ancient lake, we carry with us the poignant knowledge of what was lost when worlds collided. The Aztec Empire, with its floating gardens and magnificent temples, its sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mathematics, its rich traditions of art and poetry, would soon be gone forever. But something of its spirit would survive, woven into the fabric of a new world that would emerge from the ashes of the old. The encounter between Quartz and Moctezuma reminds us that history is made not just by grand gestures and dramatic events, but by the quiet moments when individuals from different worlds try to understand each other across the barriers of language, culture, and belief. In the end, we are all travelers on the same small planet, sharing the same hopes and fears, the same need for connection and understanding. The tragedy of the Spanish conquest was not that two worlds met, but that they failed to find a way to coexist in peace. The year was 1520, and the great city of Tenochtitlan had already felt the tremor of change. Hernán Cortés and his men had been driven from the city during what the Spanish would call La Noche Triste, a night of sorrows, when the Aztec people rose up against their unwelcome guests. But Cortés was not a man to accept defeat easily, and as the seasons turned, he prepared for his return. Picture, if you will, the calm before the storm. The canals of Tenochtitlan still carried their daily traffic of canoes filled with flowers, fruits, and families going about their lives. The great pyramid of the Templo Mayor still caught the first rays of dawn, its twin temples reaching toward the sky like ancient fingers offering prayers to the gods. The market at Tlatelolco buzzed with the gentle commerce of the civilization that had known prosperity for generations. But beyond the lake, in the territories of the Tlaxcalans and other peoples who had long chafed under Aztec rule, Cortes was gathering his forces. He moved through the countryside like a skilled diplomat, offering freedom from tribute, promising partnership instead of subjugation. One by one, the city-states that had once paid homage to the Aztec emperor began to consider a different future. The Spanish conquistador understood something that would prove decisive. This was not merely a war between Europeans and indigenous peoples, but a conflict between competing visions of Mesoamerican power. For every Spanish soldier who would march on Tenochtitlan, there would be dozens of indigenous warriors who saw in Cortes their path to liberation from Aztec dominance. As winter gave way to spring in 1521, Cortes began his methodical approach to the island city. He had learned from his earlier failures. This time, he would not simply march into the heart of the empire. He would surround it, strangle it slowly, and force it to surrender or perish. The siege began not with thunderous cannon fire, but with the quiet work of cutting off the causeways that connected the island city to the mainland. These ancient roads, built by Aztec engineers decades before, had always been both the city's strength and its potential weakness. They allowed trade and communication to flow freely, but they also meant that the city's lifeline could be severed. Imagine this confusion in those first days, as canoes laden with goods found Spanish brigantines blocking their path. The lake, which had always been a highway for the Aztec world, suddenly became a barrier. Cortes had brought with him something the Aztecs had never seen before: ships that could sail upon the lake itself, carrying cannons and armed men who could strike at the heart of the empire from the water. The Emperor Cuauhtémoc, who had taken power after the death of his uncle Moctezuma, was a young man of perhaps 25, but he possessed a fierce determination to defend his people's way of life. He had grown up in the shadow of the Great Pyramids, had learned the ancient songs and stories, and been trained in the arts of war and diplomacy. Now, as Spanish forces tightened their grip around his city, he prepared for what he knew would be a fight to the death. The siege stretched on through the spring and into the summer. Day by day, the circle grew tighter. The Spanish brigantines patrolled the lake like predators, intercepting the canoes that brought fresh water and food to the city. The causeways remained cut, guarded by Spanish soldiers and their indigenous allies who had cast their lot with the conquistadors. Within the city, life began to change in subtle ways. The great markets that had once overflowed with goods from across the empire grew quieter. The exotic feathers from the rainforests, the jade from the mountains, the cocoa from the southern regions, all of these treasures became memories as the siege tightened its grip. But the people of Tenochtitlan were not passive victims. They had built their city on an island precisely because it could be defended. They knew every canal, every hidden waterway, every secret passage through the districts of their floating metropolis. They launched raids against the Spanish positions, striking like ghosts in the pre-dawn darkness and melting away before the heavy Spanish cavalry could respond. The battle for Tenochtitlan was unlike any conflict the world had seen before. It was urban warfare conducted in a city built on water, where the very geography challenged European military conventions. Spanish soldiers, trained for battles on open fields, found themselves fighting house by house, canal by canal, through a maze of waterways and bridges that their enemies knew intimately. As the weeks passed, another enemy joined the siege, one that neither Spanish nor Aztec commanders could control. Smallpox, brought unknowingly by the European invaders, began to spread through the city. This disease, which Europeans had lived with for centuries, was completely new to the people of the Americas. It moved through the crowded districts of Tenochtitlan like an invisible army, striking down warriors and civilians alike. The Spanish chroniclers would later write of the horror they witnessed as the epidemic took hold. Families disappeared. Within days, entire neighborhoods fell silent. The bodies of the dead, which Aztec custom demanded be treated with elaborate ritual, were sometimes simply left where they fell, as the living struggled to care for themselves. And yet, through it all, the city endured. The Great Pyramid still dominated the skyline, its steps worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims and priests. The palaces of the nobility still reflected in the calm waters of the canals. The floating gardens, the chinampas, still produced their crops, tended by farmers who refused to abandon their ancestral plots, even as war raged around them. Court Eotudes, watching from his camps on the mainland, must have marveled at the resilience of his enemies. He had expected the siege to last weeks, not months. He had thought that cutting off the causeways would bring quick surrender. Instead, he found himself locked in a war of attrition against a people who seemed prepared to die rather than submit. Spanish commander tried diplomacy, sending messages into the city offering terms of surrender. He promised to spare the lives of the civilian population, to respect the temples and palaces, to allow the Aztec nobility to retain their positions under Spanish rule. But Emperor Cuauhtémoc and his council knew what such promises meant. They had seen what happened to other cities that had peacefully submitted to Spanish rule. As summer deepened, the siege entered its most brutal phase. The Spanish and their allies began to advance into the city itself, fighting their way across the causeways and through the outlying districts. But every bridge was contested. Every canal crossing became a battlefield. The Aztec defenders pulled up the wooden planks of bridges after Spanish forces passed, trapping them on islands of resistance in the middle of the lake. The sound of battle echoed across the water, day and night. The thunder of Spanish cannons mixed with the war cries of indigenous warriors, the splash of bodies falling into the canals, the crackle of fires set by both sides. The smell of gunpowder and smoke drifted across the lake, mixing with the scent of flowers from the floating gardens and the less pleasant odors of a city under siege. In the final weeks of the siege, as July turned to August, the character of the battle changed. The Spanish forces, aided by their indigenous allies, began to systematically destroy the city even as they conquered it. Buildings were pulled down, canals were filled with rubble. The intricate network of waterways that had made Tenochtitlán possible was slowly dismantled. This was not merely conquest, but transformation. Courts had decided that the Aztec capital, with its temples to foreign gods and its reminders of indigenous power, could not be allowed to survive intact. The new Spanish colony would need a new capital, built on the ruins of the old, but embodying European rather than American values. The Aztec defenders, seeing their city being destroyed around them, fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. They launched suicide attacks against Spanish positions, sometimes swimming through the canals at night to strike at enemy camps. They turned every temple into a fortress, every palace into a battleground. Emperor Cuauhtémoc, still barely more than a boy, showed a courage that impressed even his enemies. He moved through the city like a ghost, appearing wherever the fighting was fiercest, inspiring his warriors with his presence. Spanish soldiers who caught glimpses of him would later describe a figure of almost supernatural dignity, moving calmly through the chaos of battle as if they were already beyond the reach of earthly concerns. But human courage, no matter how extraordinary, could not overcome the mathematics of the siege. The Spanish forces and their allies numbered in the tens of thousands. They had control of the lake, command of the causeways, and the devastating advantage of diseases that fought their battles for them. Most crucially, they had the support of indigenous peoples who saw in the fall of Tenochtitlan their own liberation from Aztec rule. As August arrived, the end came swiftly. The Spanish forces, having fought their way to the center of the city, finally stood before the Great Pyramid of the Templo Mayor. The temples at its summit, which had witnessed the rituals and sacrifices of centuries, were empty now. The priests had fled or died. The sacred fires had been As night fell over the ruined city, the sound of victory celebrations mixed with the cries of the wounded and the prayers of the dying. The Spanish chaplains moved through the ruins, offering last rites to Christian converts and trying to bring comfort to the many who had been caught in the crossfire of empires. The indigenous survivors, both those who had fought with the Spanish and those who had defended the city, tended to their own death according to their ancient customs. In the months that followed, the work of transformation would begin in earnest. Spanish architects and engineers would survey the ruins, planning a new city that would rise from the ashes of the old. The Great Pyramid would be torn down. Its stones used to build churches and government buildings. The canals would be filled, creating solid ground for European-style streets and plazas. But on that first night after the fall, as the fires burned low and the exhausted survivors sought what rest they could find, the ghost of Tenochtitlán still lingered over the lake. In the whisper of wind through the ruins, in the gentle lapping of water against the broken causeways, in the distant cry of night birds, something of the old city remained, a memory of beauty and power that would never entirely disappear. The fall of Tenochtitlán marked the end of the last great indigenous empire of the Americas. But it also marked the beginning of something new, a mestizo civilization that would blend European and American elements in ways that neither conquistador nor emperor could have imagined. In the ruins of the old world, the seeds of the new were already taking root, waiting for the sun to rise again over the lake that had witnessed so much history. And as we drift toward sleep ourselves, we can almost hear the echoes of that ancient city, the sound of water flowing through canals, the voices of merchants in the great market, the prayers of priests in the temple courtyards. These sounds have not died. They have simply become part of the eternal song of this place, a melody that plays on in the memory of the land itself, patient and enduring as the mountains that watch over the valley of Mexico. The conquest was complete, but the story was far from over. In the years to come, the descendants of both conquerors and conquered would create something unprecedented, a new civilization that would honor the past while embracing the future, a culture that would be both European and American, both ancient and modern. But that is a story for another night, another gentle journey into the dreams of history. For now, let us rest in the knowledge that even in endings, there are beginnings, and that the human spirit, like the lake itself, endures through all the changes that time and circumstance can bring. The city of Tenochtitlán may have fallen, but its legacy lives on in the very stones of Mexico City, in the words of the Nahuatl language still spoken by millions, in the faces of the people who call this valley home. Sleep well and dream of floating cities and forgotten empires, of warriors and emperors, of the eternal dance between conquest and resistance, between the old world and the new. In your dreams, perhaps you may hear the ancient drums of the Aztecs still beating across the water, keeping time with the rhythm of history itself. The conquistadors believed they had erased the Aztec civilization from the face of the earth. They tore down the great pyramid of the Templo Mayor, filled in the sacred canals, and built their colonial city upon the ruins of Tenochtitlán. They burned the codices, those beautiful books of bark paper that contained the wisdom of centuries. They forbade the old rituals, the ancient songs, the languages that had echoed through the valley for generations. But civilizations, like rivers, have a way of finding their course even when damaged. The Aztec legacy did not die with the fall of Tenochtitlán. It simply transformed, flowing underground like the hidden waterways beneath Mexico City, emerging in unexpected places, in surprising ways, in the daily lives of millions who may not even realize they carry the blood and dreams of the ancient Mexica people. Walk through the streets of Mexico City today, and you will find the Aztec past everywhere, hiding in plain sight. The very ground beneath your feet was once the bottom of Lake Texcoco, and occasionally, when construction crews dig deep into the earth, they uncover fragments of the old city. Stone carvings emerge from the mud, pieces of pottery that once held the food of emperors, jade ornaments that once adorned the necks of priests. The ancient city lies sleeping beneath the modern one, dreaming its eternal dreams. The great cathedral that dominates the central square, the Zocalo, was built with stones taken from the Templo Mayor. Spanish architects, practical men, saw no reason to waste good building materials. And so, in a sense, the Aztec pyramid still stands, its essence incorporated into the very structure of the church that replaced it. The conquistadors thought they were erasing the past, but they were actually preserving it, embedding it forever in the heart of their new city. But the Aztec legacy lives on in ways far more profound than mere stones and ruins. It pulses through the veins of Mexico itself, in the blood of its people, in the rhythms of its culture, in the flavors of its food, in the cadences of its speech. Mexico is a mestizo nation, a blending of European and indigenous cultures that has created something entirely new, yet deeply rooted in the ancient past. Consider the language itself. Spanish is the official language of Mexico, but it is a Spanish enriched and transformed by Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Words that we use every day, words that have traveled around the world, came from the mouths of Aztec speakers. Chocolate, from the Nahuatl zocolatl, the bitter water that was the drink of gods and emperors. Tomato, from Tenochtitlán, the fruit that has become essential to cuisines from Italy to India. Coyote, from Coyotl, the clever trickster of both ancient myths and modern landscapes. These words carry within them entire worlds of meaning. When we say chocolate, we invoke the sacred cocoa ceremonies of the Aztec priests, the careful preparation of the bitter drink that was believed to connect the human world with the divine. When we plant tomatoes in our gardens, we participate in an agricultural tradition that stretches back to the Chinampas, the floating gardens of Lake Texcoco. The Aztec past is not dead. It lives in our vocabulary, in our daily conversations, in the very words we use to describe our world. But perhaps nowhere is the Aztec legacy more visible than in the flag of Mexico itself. There, in the center of the green, white, and red banner, an eagle perches on a cactus, a snake grasped in its heels. This is the sign that the god Huitzilopochtli promised to the wandering Mexica people, the divine signal that would show them where to build their great city. The flag of modern Mexico is thus a direct link to the founding myth of Tenochtitlán, a proclamation that this nation, despite centuries of conquest and colonization, still remembers its indigenous roots. Eagle on the cactus appears not just on the government, but on coins, on seals, on buildings throughout Mexico. It is a symbol that bridges the ancient and the modern, the mythical and the political. Every time a Mexican looks at their flag, they are reminded of the vision that led their ancestors to the shore of Lake Texcoco, to the place where a great civilization would rise from the water's dot. The influence of Aztec culture extends far beyond symbols and language. In the markets of Mexico, you can still find vendors selling foods that would have been familiar to the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan. Tamales, those packets of corn dough steamed in corn husks, are prepared today much as they were 500 years ago. The technique of making tortillas from masa, grinding corn with lime to create the perfect consistency. This too is a gift from the Aztec past. Mexican cuisine, recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, is fundamentally indigenous in its roots. The use of chiles, the preparation of salsas, the combination of corn, beans, and squash that nutritionists now recognize as a perfect protein source. These are all legacies of the Aztec agricultural tradition. When people around the world enjoy Mexican food, they are tasting flavors that were first perfected in the markets of Tenochtitlan. The artistic traditions of Mexico also bear the deep imprint of Aztec culture. The great muralists of the 20th century, Diego Rivera, José Clemente Orozco, David Alfaro Siqueiros, deliberately drew upon pre-Columbian themes and imagery. They painted Aztec warriors and priests, recreated the splendor of Tenochtitlan, and proclaimed the indigenous heritage of Mexico with bold strokes of color and form. Their murals, which adorn public buildings throughout Mexico, are visual statements that the Aztec past is not something to be forgotten or ashamed of, but something to be celebrated and honored. But the Aztec legacy is not confined to Mexico alone. The influence of Aztec culture has spread throughout the Americas and beyond, carried by migration, trade, and the simple power of cultural exchange. In the United States, millions of people of Mexican descent carry with them the traditions, foods, and stories of their indigenous ancestors. Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, is celebrated from Los Angeles to New York, bringing with it ancient beliefs about death and remembrance that trace back to Aztec concepts of the afterlife. The Aztec understanding of time, too, has left its mark on the modern world. The famous Aztec calendar stone, with its intricate calculations of cosmic cycles, represents a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mathematics that rivaled anything in the contemporary European world. The Aztec concept of time as cyclical rather than linear, their belief in the eternal return of cosmic ages, has influenced everything from archaeology to popular culture. In the realm of medicine, researchers are discovering that many traditional remedies used by indigenous peoples of Mexico have their roots in Aztec pharmacology. The priests and healers of Tenochtitlan were skilled in the use of hundreds of plant medicines, many of which are now being studied by modern scientists. The Aztec knowledge of herbal medicine, passed down through generations of traditional healers, continues to contribute to our understanding of health and healing. The spiritual legacy of the Aztecs is perhaps more complex and controversial, but no less significant. The Catholic Church, which worked so hard to suppress indigenous religious practices, found itself incorporating elements of Aztec spirituality in subtle ways. The Virgin of Guadalupe, Mexico's patron saint, appeared to an indigenous man and spoke to him in Nahuatl. Her image, with its distinctly indigenous features and its symbolism that echoes pre-Columbian goddess worship, represents a syncretic blending of Catholic and Aztec religious traditions. Throughout Mexico, you can find churches built on the sites of ancient temples, where indigenous peoples pray to Catholic saints who bear a striking resemblance to their ancestral gods. The Day of the Dead celebrations, while nominally Christian, incorporate ritual elements that would have been familiar to Aztec priests. The boundaries between the old religion and the new were never as clear as the conquistadors intended. Aztec emphasis on education has also left its mark on Mexican culture. The Camacec, the schools where young Aztec nobles learned history, poetry, astronomy, and statcraft, established a tradition of learning that survives to this day. The reverence for knowledge, the belief in the power of education to transform society, the respect for teachers and scholars, these values, deeply embedded in Aztec culture, continue to influence Mexican approaches to education and intellectual life. Even the concept of Mexico itself owes much to the Aztec legacy. The name Mexico comes from Mexica, the name the Aztecs used for themselves. When the revolutionaries of the early 19th century sought to create an independent nation, they chose to call it Mexico, explicitly linking their new country to its indigenous past rather than to its colonial heritage. This was a radical choice for its time, a rejection of European models in favor of an indigenous identity. The archaeological rediscovery of Aztec civilization in the 19th and 20th centuries has added new dimensions to this legacy. When workers digging in downtown Mexico City discovered the Templo Mayor in 1978, they revealed to the world the sophistication and grandeur of Aztec architecture and art. The museum that now houses these treasures has become a pilgrimage site for millions of visitors, a place where the ancient past and the modern present meet and commune. In popular culture, Aztec themes appear in everything from Hollywood movies to video games to fashion. The distinctive aesthetic of Aztec art, its bold geometric patterns, its powerful imagery of eagles and serpents, its intricate calendrical symbols has inspired artists and designers around the world. The Aztec legacy has become part of the global cultural vocabulary, a source of imagery and inspiration that transcends national boundaries. The environmental wisdom of the Aztecs is also gaining new recognition in our age of climate change and ecological crisis. The chinampas, the floating gardens of Lake Texcoco, represented a form of sustainable agriculture that produced incredibly high yields without depleting the soil. Modern agricultural researchers are studying these ancient techniques, looking for ways to apply Aztec wisdom to contemporary farming challenges. The Aztec understanding of the relationship between humans and nature, their belief in the interconnectedness of all living things, resonates with modern environmental movements. The concept of reciprocity with the natural world, the idea that humans must give back to the earth that sustains them. These are Aztec principles that speak to our contemporary ecological consciousness. Perhaps most importantly, the Aztec legacy challenges us to think differently about history itself. For too long, the story of the Americas was told from the perspective of the conquerors, as if history began with Columbus and courts. The rediscovery and celebration of Aztec civilization reminds us that the indigenous peoples of the Americas had their own rich histories, their own great achievements, their own contributions to human civilization. The Aztecs were not primitive peoples waiting to be civilized by Europeans. They were the inheritors of thousands of years of indigenous innovation and cultural development. They built one of the largest cities in the world, created a sophisticated system of government, developed advanced techniques in agriculture and engineering, and produced art and literature of remarkable beauty and complexity. Their legacy reminds us that human civilization has many sources, many roots, many branches. As we stand in the central square of Mexico City today, surrounded by the bustling life of a modern metropolis, we can feel the presence of the past beneath our feet. The Great Pyramid may be gone, but its essence lives on in the stones of the cathedral. The canals may be filled, but their memory flows through the underground rivers that still run beneath the city. The emperor's palace may be ruins, but its spirit inhabits the national palace that now houses the government of Mexico. The Aztec legacy is not a museum piece, not a relic of a dead past, but a living force that continues to shape the world we inhabit. It lives in the words we speak, the food we eat, the art we create, the values we hold. It lives in the faces of the millions of people who carry indigenous blood in their veins, who walk the streets of Mexico City and remember, consciously or unconsciously, the great civilization that once rose from the waters of Lake Texcoco. The conquest of 1521 was not the end of the story, but a transformation, a metamorphosis. The Aztec civilization did not die. It became something new, something that incorporated both its indigenous essence and the influences that came from across the sea. Like a river that disappears underground only to emerge miles away, the Aztec legacy went underground during the colonial period and emerged in the modern world, changed but recognizable, diminished in some ways, but enriched in others. Today, as Mexico grapples with the challenges of the 21st century, globalization, urbanization, environmental degradation, economic inequality, the Aztec legacy offers both inspiration and guidance. The memory of a great indigenous civilization that once flourished in this valley reminds Mexicans that they are the inheritors of a rich and powerful cultural tradition. The Aztec example of adaptation and resilience provides a model for facing contemporary challenges. The floating gardens of the Aztecs offer lessons in sustainable agriculture. The Aztec emphasis on education and knowledge provides a foundation for building a more just and equitable society. The Aztec understanding of the relationship between humans and nature offers wisdom for addressing the environmental crisis. The Aztec tradition of artistic excellence provides inspiration for cultural creativity and expression. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Aztecs is simply the reminder that indigenous peoples of the Americas were capable of creating great civilizations, of achieving remarkable things, of contributing to the wealth of human culture. In a world that has too often dismissed or marginalized indigenous voices, the Aztec legacy stands as a powerful testament to the creativity, intelligence, and resilience of the native peoples of the Americas. As night falls over Mexico City, as the lights twinkle like stars reflected in the long-vanished waters of Lake Texcoco, we can almost hear the echoes of the ancient city that once stood here. The sound of conch shells calling priests to prayer, the splash of paddles as canoes navigate the canals, the voices of merchants hawking their wares in the great market of Tlatelolco. These sounds have not disappeared. They have simply transformed, becoming part of the symphony of modern Mexico City. The priest's conch shell has become the church bell calling the faithful to Mass. The merchant's cry has become the street vendor's call. The splash of paddles has become the sound of traffic moving through the streets that now cover the ancient waterways. The Aztec legacy is all around us, woven into the fabric of daily life in ways both obvious and subtle. It is in the morning. Tortilla, made from corn ground with lime, according to a technique perfected centuries ago. It is in the afternoon chocolate, drunk sweet now instead of bitter, but still carrying within it the memory of the sacred cocoa ceremonies. It is in the evening prayer offered to a Catholic saint who bears the face of an indigenous goddess. And as we prepare to rest, to let sleep carry us into dreams of our own, we can take comfort in the knowledge that the great civilization that once flourished on the shores of Lake Texcoco lives on, not as a relic of the past, but as a vibrant part of the present. The Aztec legacy reminds us that human cultures are remarkably resilient, that they can survive conquest and colonization, that they can adapt and transform and emerge in new forms while still maintaining their essential character. The story of the Aztecs is not a story of ending, but of continuation. It is not a story of defeat, but of transformation. It is not a story of the past, but of the eternal present in which all human cultures participate. The eagle still perches on the cactus, the snake still writhes in its heels, and the ancient promise of the god Huitzilopochtli continues to be fulfilled in the daily life of the Mexican people. Sleep well, and in your dreams, perhaps you will hear the distant sound of drums echoing across the water, the voices of the ancestors calling to their descendants, the eternal song of a civilization that refused to die, that thing instead to transform and live on in new forms, new expressions, new manifestations of the eternal human spirit that first built a great city on an island in a lake, and that continues to build and create and dream in the Valley of Mexico to this day. As the final shadows of the empire fade from sight, and the last flickers of torchlight on ancient temples are carried away by the night wind, we return to the place where it all began, Lake Texcoco. The waters are calm now, the waves barely whispering against the shore. The mist drifts lazily across the surface, as if trying to veil the secrets once held beneath its depths. You are lying still, breathing gently, and the story of the Aztecs settles around you like a soft blanket. But something lingers in the silence, something ancient and eternal. Listen closely. In the distance, almost out of reach, there is a sound. It is faint, but steady. The deep rhythm of stone drums, slow, measured, timeless, the kind of sound that does not come from speakers or instruments, but from the earth itself. It resonates in the bones of mountains and the memory of water. It carries the breath of a people who once stood tall upon sacred pyramids and spoke to the heavens. The Aztecs are gone, but not forgotten. Their cities may have fallen, their temples dismantled, their empire broken, yet something more powerful endures. Memory. Memory does not need walls to live in. It finds shelter in hearts, in soil, in stories, in symbols. It is alive in the colors of a dancer's feathers, in the taste of tamales wrapped in maize leaves, in the rhythm of Nahuatl poetry, still whispered by elders to children. There is no need to search for ruins to find the Aztecs. They are in the pulse of a drumbeat on a festival night, in the scent of incense rising during a Day of the Dead altar, in the way a young artist paints an eagle soaring over a cactus, unaware that their hand is guided by thousands of years of culture, flowing like a river through time. In every culture there are echoes. In Mexico, they do not echo quietly. They sing, loud, bold, alive. And at the center of that chorus is a rhythm one that began long ago on the stone steps of Tenochtitlán, and that still finds its way into the heartbeat of the land. Many centuries have passed since the conquest. The stones have shifted. The lake has shrunk. The temples have been covered by cities, the causeways by pavement. And yet, when the moon rises high over Mexico City and the air grows still, the veil of time grows thin. In the silence between moments, the drums begin again. You can almost see them, the dancers gathered by firelight, their shadows flickering on temple walls. You can hear the priests chanting to the gods, the sound of shells and flutes weaving into the dark. You can sense the crowd watching in awe, believing that their offerings would bring the sun, the rain, the harvest. The stone drums do not play for war now. They do not summon warriors or sacrifices. Instead, they play for memory, for reverence, for a people who dared to build an empire on water, to raise their city into the clouds and offer their voices to the gods. And when you dream tonight, let yourself drift back to that city of lakes and causeways. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a grand pyramid, the sky painted gold by the rising sun. Below you, the waters of Texcoco shimmer with light. The chinampas stretch out like green carpets floating on the lake. Canoes glide silently through. The canals. Traders, teachers, farmers, priests all living, moving, thriving. You are not just a visitor in this dream. You are part of it. The heartbeat of the city echoes through your chest. The drums are calling not just to remember, but to awaken something ancient in your soul. It is not a memory that belongs only to museums or history books. It is living, breathing heritage. The kind that wraps itself around you gently and whispers, "We were here. We still are." The story of the Aztecs, like the night itself, does not end. It only deepens. It folds into dreams, into songs, into the steady beat of life. And now, as you drift deeper into sleep, let the sound of those ancient drums carry you. Let the waters of Texcoco rock you softly. Let the mist of history surround you. You are safe here. You are wrapped in the story of a people who danced between stars and stone, who built with hands and heart, who believed that even after the end, something sacred would remain. Tonight, that sacred thing is with you. It hums beneath your pillow. It moves with the rhythm of your breath. It sings through your dreams. The stone drums are still echoing. Good night.